Hello, Katrina Davis. I'm going to walk us through the cardiovascular system, and I think the most efficient way to do that is just to walk us through blood flow through the cardiovascular system. I think that's the best way to understand the different parts of the cardiovascular system as well as their roles and responsibilities. I printed off this diagram too as well to help me with that process. So I'm going to start with the tissue capillaries up here. These capillaries are typically about one cell thick, and because of that, oxygen exchange with CO2 can be done very efficiently. These are the smallest blood vessels. So this is where deoxygenated blood from our muscles starts in the capillaries and is transported into larger but still small blood vessels called venules. The deoxygenated blood then travels through veins, which are just bigger venules, and these veins typically only transport deoxygenated blood. This blood is then transported through veins named the superior and inferior vena cava. They're not labeled on this diagram, but I wrote them in here. These veins take the deoxygenated blood into the right atrium, right here, which is the upper right part of the heart. The deoxygenated blood then travels through a valve called the tricuspid valve, which separates the right atrium and the right ventricle, which is the lower right part of the heart. Once the blood travels through this tricuspid valve, the valve closes to ensure the backflow does not occur. This deoxygenated blood then travels from the right ventricle past another valve called a semilunar valve, or in this case, it's the pulmonary valve. And then once it passes through this semilunar valve, it goes through the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery transports this deoxygenated blood to the lungs where it's oxygenated. And as we know, we breathe in oxygen, which is then transported into our blood, and we breathe out or discharge the CO2. So once our blood is oxygenated, it is then transported from our lungs via the pulmonary vein into the left atrium of the heart, which is the upper left part of the heart. It passes through another valve called a mitral or bicuspid valve. And once the oxygenated blood now passes through that valve, it is now in the left ventricle. The left ventricle is kind of the powerhouse of the entire cardiovascular system as it initiates transport of blood through the entirety of our systemic system. So once blood is in our left ventricle, it passes through another semilunar valve, or in this case, an aortic valve, and it is then transported into the aorta, which is just a large artery which transports blood through the rest of our tissue and muscles and extremities. So through the aorta, and that aorta branches off into other arteries, which takes our oxygenated blood to our tissues and muscles. These arteries branch off into smaller arteries that are named arterioles. This blood then goes through the tissue capillaries yet again, and the muscles are capable of now using that oxygen for cellular respiration, and the process begins again. The deoxygenated blood is then taken through the tissue capillaries, venules, veins, and the system repeats itself. So I hope you now have a better understanding of the cardiovascular system and blood flow as a whole. Thank you.